Hello, everyone. The global fashion industry is undergoing a massive shift, moving away from fancy, sterile mall storefronts and directly into digital marketplaces. Today, we are seeing an unprecedented increase in the purchase of secondhand goods, mainly vintage clothing, online. By definition, a vintage garment is any piece of clothing that is at least 20 years old, but in today's terms, it can represent a highly profitable shirt or pair of jeans in like this rapidly expanding global economy. I've experienced the scale of this market firsthand by founding and operating my own independent online resale business called the 911 Closet. And what many people don't realize is that selling vintage clothing online isn't just about digging through bins or going to thrift stores and finding these pieces of clothing and then selling them for profit. It's more so a complex combination of sustainability, strategic sourcing, and online software engineering to help automate the entire process from purchasing the garment at the store to listing it to selling it. And today I'll talk about the cultural shift towards secondhand fashion, the personal logistics of sourcing vintage inventory, and how data analytics and software engineering are combined to manage a modern digital resale business. So moving forward on the cultural shift, let's start with the cultural and environmental shift. The modern vintage market thrives on the aesthetic appeal of natural fades, distressing, and like general 90s streetwear vibes. But more importantly, it relies on the exclusivity factor of owning like an old school, rare, one of one piece of history that will never be restocked. You will rarely see anyone else wearing it. And people want to wear something that's unique and not something that's produced in like millions and there's a million identical copies. They want to be unique and they want to be their own person. As for the environmental impact, this is purchasing used clothing is a direct response to a global crisis. In an article titled The Environmental Cost of Fast Fashion, which was written by Mark Bain for The Atlantic in 2015, it highlights that the modern fashion industry is responsible for close to 10% of total global carbon emissions and produces massive amount of textile waste. So purchasing vintage clothing from the thrift stores and reselling them and giving them new homes directly combats this by promoting a circular economy and keeping old clothing out of landfills and into the hands of people who are interested. Slide 4. So this movement is largely driven by the younger generation, as we can see, and then given by the graph I pulled out from the article titled "Depop and the Rise of Gen Z Thrifting," written by Mary Hamberry for the Business Insider in 2020. We can see that young consumers are actively rejecting disposable fashion in favor of sustainable, curated digital platforms. As we can see by the chart from the article, if you look at the demographic analysis on the chart, you can see exactly who's driving this economy. And this data shows that the vast majority of digital resale consumers fall right into the Gen Z bracket. And they aren't going to like traditional malls like the old days. They are now scrolling through specialized apps on their phones, such as Depop, and purchasing used clothing. So now you might be asking, how do business actually find these clothes? And that brings me to one of my second points, which is strategic sourcing and inventory acquisition. So the traditional methods involve early mornings at like a local thrift store or like an estate sale or yard sale where I could go and find older pieces of clothing for relatively cheap. And this would help me, uh, based on my intuition, I'll be able to tell how much I could sell this piece for. But on a larger scale, however, it involves like a complex economics of like wholesale rag houses. And at this level, clothing like isn't bought individually. Like I purchased them. It's purchased like in by the tens of thousands of pounds and like these compressed bales, as you can see. And this comes from all over the world. So authentication. Once the clothing is acquired, like authentication is critical. So for example, it's important to define a piece by its age or what time it was probably produced in. So like 80s and 90s t-shirts, they have something called single stitch where it's only a single stitch in the hemming of the sleeves and the bottom. And today there's double stitching to help keep clothing fresher for longer. So as Elizabeth Segran detailed in her 2021 Fast Company article, how secondhand clothing became a multi-billion-dollar industry, she mentions how sellers must meticulously verify brand tags and copyright dates to spot counterfeit items and ensure quality control. So this also directly impacts the economics of the business. A seller has to constantly calculate the profit margins by tracking the initial cost of a piece sold and then aggressively factoring in the moving variables like platform fees and fluctuating postage costs to ensure like the business stays green and you continue to make profit. And where once I like these items are sourced and priced, uh, I list them on my storefronts. So this brings me to like my final point, which is engineering and digital operations. So running a modern resale business means navigating digital marketplaces by managing active listings across multiple platforms simultaneously. Like we have Depop, OfferUp, Mercari, and eBay. And it requires like a constant testing for like like photography to make sure that the picture's appealing to the youth and writing optimized descriptions so the algorithms can actually push your items to the top of the search feed and doesn't get cluttered under other pieces of clothing to help get your items sold quicker. And then this leads me to engineering and automation. So when you're dealing with thousands of unique one-of-kind pieces, basic spreadsheets are basically insufficient. To solve this problem for my own business, I utilize a coding language like Python and JavaScript to build a custom Streamlit application that acts as a central resale engine. So by using developing tools like API instructions and integrations, the software can automatically analyze inventory photos, track my multi-platform sales, and calculate real-time market value. So this is a screenshot of my my selling engine. And yeah, in conclusion, the next time you scroll past a 90s graphic tee that looks faded, old, or you might say is good for the trash, you should know that you're actually looking at a highly sophisticated, data-driven global market. And today I talked about how the cultural and environmental rise of secondhand clothing, the strategic logistics of sourcing and authenticating inventory, and the software engineering required to manage a successful resale business. And vintage fashion allows us to preserve the past, but it's the technology of the future that allows the economics to continue to drive forward. Thank you.